Hey, what's up, guys? This is Lucas Burnley here with my co host, TJ Schwartz, and you are listening to the Edge and Flow podcast. Um, we've got a topic today that is stemming from some things that TJ is directly going through and that I've gone through in different ways over the years. It really comes down to balance, and the balance is production in the workshop versus promotion, any kind of content creation, and maybe a little bit of R&D thrown in there as well, and how as a sole shop owner you balance or don't balance those things. So TJ, man, I'm going to hand it over to you since this is like fresh on your mind.
Yeah, it just seems like in the modern era we live in with all the YouTube and the Instagram and whatnot, that staying relevant involves to some extent being also a content creator. So it's not just about making your product anymore, which some might disagree. I'm sure some people doing very well just making their product and going to shows and whatnot. But for me, in looking at the next 10 years, I think honing my skills as I guess content creator would be the only phrase I could think of is an important part of building my brand, because again, staying relevant means staying visible, and where people's eyes are is where you need to be. And with Instagram and YouTube, like and this podcast, it takes a certain degree of effort to do it. But the hard part is that I've run into is like I'm scaling my business in my shop and I'm making more knives, and as the demand for my time in the shop increases, there's a tendency or like a desire to just kind of bag all the content creation and just go to making knives and just say, well, I've got enough customers for X amount of months. That's all I need to focus on right now. But then a few months later, you realize like, man, I've been dark, and it does seem like exposure and promotion sort of slips in that time. You know what I mean? So the idea of balancing those two, of like actually making stuff and staying relevant in the 21st century, is a challenge. It's something that I'm interested in learning more about, seeing
I
what you
think,
think.
man, I think I think this is going to be relevant in a few different areas, but honestly, I think this is probably a problem that is maybe not as old as craft, but well, I mean, sure. I mean, you always had to get your product in front of a population that was interested in it. If
Hmm.
we go back in custom knife making, just relating it to that, originally it was shows,
Hmm.
because if you were a maker and you didn't go to a show, no one saw your work. This is like pre magazines, this is pre, internet. So you went to the shows, you took your orders, you went to the next show. If you stop going to shows, you might maintain some of your customer base, but it changes, right? These are like the
Hmm.
legacy makers. I mean, these are like, the Lovelaces. Like, this is the
Yeah.
era that they operated in. Um, moving forward, even as like magazines came around, that was the same thing. Like, if you didn't have your knives photographed, they didn't get in the magazines, right?
Hmm.
um like many areas of our life, the the resources are like exponentially greater than they've ever been, but so are the demands on our time,
Yeah.
right?
One of the ways I've heard it put is with social media, if you're a business owner, the benefit of it is that you can use it. The problem with it is you have to use it.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like it's a double-edged sword of as soon as everyone else, it's like an arms race, because
Right.
of all the other businesses are using it, they're going to, fill the space of where people's eyes and ears are. And so if
Right.
you're not there too, then you're a step behind.
Well, and it's crazy because we're all at different stages in our journey.
Mhm.
Um, when I first started making knives, I was really fortunate to kind of come into like the forum era.
Mhm.
So this was the USN forum, Blade forums, Knife Network, um, CK&G, like, which was custom knife and gun forums. And in there, you basically had an element of social media, right? Because you had access to a customer base and you had access to other makers. And I always kind of looked at it as like the pit at Blade Show. You're just in a social event with people that want to be in the same room and have similar interests.
Mhm.
In a way, that was easier to manage than what we've got going on now. Because it was kind of sole source. Like, I would do my shows in the year. When I wasn't doing a show, I would be on the USN forum. Towards the end, I was only, I think, on the USN forum. Um, But you would go on, you would post some photos. I had like a sub forum in there, and you might be on there a couple times a day. That's a very different flow than Instagram and Facebook are
Mhm.
now for most people, which is borderline constant interaction.
Yeah. When I came into the industry right when Instagram was like taking hold of this whole industry and Instagram kind of became the flagship, it seemed like the torch had been passed from Blade Forms to Instagram right about when I came along.
Yep.
And Instagram at the time was chronological and it was just generic. Like there wasn't anything fancy with it. Didn't have the reels, stories.
Man, it
Like
was the
you would
best.
follow 50 people and you would see those 50 people's posts chronologically. And if you refresh the page and no one had posted since the last time you refreshed, that was all you saw.
Right.
So you would check it an hour later, and if three other people that you follow posted, you would see three more posts. And it was just a chronological linear feed. And it was a good proxy for the forums because that's sort of the way forums are. But then the algorithm era came along, and now we're seeing, the aftermath of that. And it used to be with Instagram when I got started. Instagram, I've credited many times with like the formation of my brand and business
Mm-hmm.
initially and why certain people heard about me in the early days. And then now the difficulty in achieving that is more a technical difficulty of like knowing what the algorithm is, where is this headed, what or it should be doing more video content, less images, how many hashtags, it's become like a science, and that's where just staying relevant in that scene is a challenge.
Well, in a way, and I'm like probably aging out of Instagram in a way because I'm not actively modifying my process for Instagram.
Mhm.
Um, not that it's not that I don't want to. It's a value proposition. Um, at this point, am I best served figuring out how to do more reels, spending the time doing reels, video creation? Like, absolutely. If I'm interested in it, have the bandwidth to do it. This kind of falls under the never fight a week position, um,
Mhm. Yeah.
concept for me, which is like, no matter what I do, I will not be able to create EDC content like, Peter McKinnon or Raven the Pirate or,
Yeah.
I mean, these guys who that is like what they're doing. Like, watch a couple of Talon's videos. That's video production. That's the job, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
What's interesting to me is that's actually kind of where you started. I've always had to manage like making and figuring out how to like interact on a forum or moving into Facebook, moving into Instagram. You actually started out with video production, and now the other side of your business has become so dominant that even though you've done it, it's hard to maintain it.
Yeah. It's 100% a time thing. I mean, like you said, it's a full-time job to create that kind of content, or at least if you have a full-time job and you're doing it on the side, that's the only thing you're doing on the side. You know what I
Right.
mean? Because that stuff is time consuming to
Right.
do it well. And an example of someone who also followed a similar path as me, like the similar era, is
Mm-hmm.
John Grimsmo. So him and I came in
Right.
the industry about the same time, and he went all in on YouTube and became like YouTube's darling knife maker.
Right.
And he's like,
Documented the entire process from start, building a CNC
yeah.
machine, like really
Yeah.
documenting.
And
Yeah.
and he's evidence of what happens when you like really go and commit yourself to that kind of project of
Yeah.
not necessarily he's not necessarily doing like high-end video content, and even he
Right.
wouldn't say that. It's just vlogs.
Right.
And that's where kind of the way my YouTube channel is set up right now. But the hard part is, like I said, is it takes a huge amount of brain power to figure out what trends you should be following, what effort you should be putting into say YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. And then layered on top of I have to make the knives. You know what I mean? I have to go
Right.
out there and actually make the product. And so that soup of just things going on it's always competing for my time and it's challenging.
Well, and there's another element to this which is kind of wrapped up in the time side of things, which is as you are doing more production work, doing runs of a similar model, what are you showing? What is the new and interesting content that you are creating around that? If that's the goal, if it's like slightly longer format YouTube, my goal has always just been like with Instagram, essentially, it's kind of just a window into the shop. It's like you peek into the
Mhm.
window, and you're like, oh, Luke's getting ready for a show.
Mhm.
If I'm out of the shop, sometimes it's just family stuff. Like it's just a
Yeah.
connection point for people. But we've never really actively tried to like monetize Instagram. Um, Most of our sales are not generated from Instagram. It's just another community access point,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And I've
Mhm.
never done YouTube because I realize I don't have the bandwidth to create and edit videos
Mhm.
on any type of consistent schedule,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's going to be a problem. Well, I don't know if problem's the right word. It's going to be a challenge for pretty much everyone moving forward in this generation. And I think no one can guess here in 10 years along our career what's going to be happening and where people's focus is going to go. Is YouTube going to stay on it on this course or whatnot? But I've forced myself to, I, it's easy when I have like customers at my door that want knives. It's easy for me to start to like hide in the shop and almost disappear as far as like a
Totally.
public outlet goes. It's like it's almost the natural thing because it's like, well, I've got enough customers to keep me busy for quite a number of months. Might as well just make knives and just let the chips fall the way they will. And then
Right.
6 months later, in this day and age, like it seems like your relevancy can weaken in just a number of months
I think that's
by
true,
disappearing.
especially initially. Two thoughts on this. We like on the like if you go back 10 or 15 years in custom makers, you see a maker fill his order book and he gets so busy that he stops doing shows, kind of stops posting new work because he's working on the same work. People forget quickly.
Hmm.
Um, but I think if you're at a certain point in the industry, everyone sees the trajectories. You can't be everywhere all the time, everything to all people, right?
Hmm.
Something things shift unless you are very happy making the same type of product in the same type of output, and your entire kind of business model is balanced and like holistic around like I make this many knives, I post this many photos, I do these shows every year.
Hmm.
To me,
Right.
that's always it's never worked. Um, Growth is painful.
Hmm.
And so a lot of times when you're in a growth phase, something else is having to like flex or conform or break in order to allow that movement.
Hmm.
So the two thoughts there would be that I think like where you're at now, I think it's the pendulum, right? I think it is this idea of I don't know that you can effectively balance it day to day. So it might swing where you're going, all right, these 2 weeks are, I'm deep in production. You
Hmm.
can take photos, you can film, you just probably can't interact, edit, post, and like be present also in that time.
Hmm. Yeah.
But that's also not 6 months.
Right.
It might be like once or twice a month you're putting out a few videos, and you're really good on Instagram actually. Like you're posting process, you're giving little shop insights, you're moving machines in. I think that to me, where we're at, I see that as the value.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Well, I can say this, Luke. Like I've always described you to other people as like having some of the strongest brand awareness of any guy in the knife industry, as far as like you being aware of your own brand and
Hmm.
what that means, like as far as how you run your business, has been impressive to me. And so I've always been trying to learn from what you do with regard to brand management. And I think one of the things that makes your brand so successful is it doesn't seem like you are designing some slick brand and then kind of like plastering it and putting it in people's faces and doing the kind of like hiring a design firm and making it look all pretty. Like it seems more human. So how do you feel about setting that up? Do you feel like that was really intentional, or do you feel like it's just an extension of your personality? Or
I mean, it's probably a little bit of both. Ultimately, I think as a maker, looking one, you can be a maker and not be a brand. Okay.
Mhm.
Being a brand and being a maker don't have to be like simultaneous. the decision to interact, I think, as a brand or have a brand presence, I think is kind of a first step towards that. Like I look at anything I do under our brand kind of as me and as
Mhm.
Maddie, as the business. Like it was why I moved away from the term mid tech when we were doing production runs, because I just thought, hey, my brand can support a production knife. I can tell people it's production. As a custom maker, some of those decisions can be scary because you don't want people to perceive you as a maker differently,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of it. Um, as far as like the growth and the development of it, like it's been pretty organic. Um, I'm like probably not where I want to be with it. Like, but it's the same thing where I could shift all of my energy and bandwidth into growing the brand, but that would mean I'd have to give up a bunch of other stuff. And I've never been ready to like take that leap.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's progressed like really organically. It hasn't scaled too fast. It hasn't, flooded a market. It hasn't like, it's just kind of grown
Mhm.
with me. Um,
Yeah, and I would say that's like the feeling I get as an onlooker is like it seems like you have an ability to sense the limits of your brand and where like
right.
you may be approaching a limit as far as like how many of this certain product should be sold or how much expansion you can afford to do, and like it just seems like your ability to grow organically without overextending is
Right.
impressive.
I really think, I mean, if I could make more product, I would, in a lot of areas. Cause my goal, like I really like it. I've always said exclusive inclusivity. Like I want the product to feel special. I want people to be able to get it. Right. My goal
Mhm.
is to never like shut it down. Like, I mean, we do drops and like a drop will last for 30 seconds. And that's me doing like, I'm trying to do something bigger and I'm always like shocked and like, okay. And over the
Mhm.
years, the numbers have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, but so is the
Mhm.
support and the demand.
Mhm.
So that's the other part of this. I think that from a brand building standpoint and like from a social media standpoint, it's like what is your actual goal with social media? What is the point of it? For me, it's always come back to community. So I don't look at like, hey, how can I increase my social media presence or like how can I create like much better content? It's way more base than that for me, which is like how
Mhm.
can I connect with my community?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it shows, and I think it's paying dividends, I think, for your brand, like the way you've managed it. It doesn't seem
Yeah.
salesman-y.
Yeah, I'm not a salesman.
Yeah.
I'm not good at sales. I don't think I'm good at marketing. Um but
You're
in
not.
that, man, like I realized like if you look at my Instagram, the last thing I posted was like when I was getting ready for the Pacific Northwest Invitational Knife Show.
Mhm.
I've been working since then. I just haven't, man, it's hard. Like what do I post? I don't always have something to say. And that's like that to me, people who are super consistent with a daily post or like a post every couple of days, I think that's a much better model. Like I would benefit if I just posted something regardless of what it was every day.
Mhm. Yeah.
Why at this stage does that feel like too much? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's weird to me. I don't understand why it seems almost fatiguing to post every day when it really takes, like, a minute to do. And,
Right.
if it's not a video, if it's just, like, you're just posting a picture with a nice caption or something, like,
Yep.
it feels fatiguing. I don't know if it's, like, social anxiety that has something to do with like broadcasting yourself to a bunch of people or what, but for I've heard it from a lot of people that it's like it's tiring to upkeep a social media account, but at the
Yep.
same time it should be totally doable if you look at like how many minutes it takes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I really think it just comes down to like the time pie, which man, I really need a better term. Like I don't know how to like I
Mhm.
think of a pie and the slices and I'm like
Mhm.
that's our time. When you're dealing with production, when you're dealing with kids, when you're dealing with design work or I mean god forbid like slowing down to like improve processes or anything like this,
Mhm.
it's not that any one thing is difficult. It's that all of the things are pulling you in different directions and are different parts of your brain. Man, that's difficult,
Mhm.
right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, it the balance side of it, because we were talking about earlier how I spent 8 years running my business, not necessarily making my own product. So everything I was doing was like thinking about designing, managing my time for sitting down in front of SolidWorks, but interacting with people, networking, setting up shows, talking to people on the phone. Like it was a very hands off, but like just socially involved way of doing business. But now that I have this like behemoth of a commitment, which is to make knives and a lot of them, and have all these customers and stuff, which I love doing, it's like it's totally thrown a wrench in this mix, and the whole thing is basically blown up in every direction, and I'm like trying to reassemble it. And so that's like my main job right now. And I want to build a good system. I don't want to limp forever,
right.
So I'm trying to think intentionally about how I put it back together. And like you said, what things do I just not need to do? What can I just cut out?
Well, what
what
can you
doesn't
cut
need to
out,
go
and
back?
what do you actually want? Like growth for growth's sake is like I don't see it as a benefit. I think it is a really Western way of working where you're like, more. Like,
Hmm.
what's the answer? Okay, I'm making this many. I should make more because more
Hmm.
means more money, right?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a freedom in my mind when I feel like the things that gonna make are going to sell. Like there's a certain sense of security that comes from having enough demand to where you're not designing something and you're thinking when you're designing it, like, am I going to be able to sell enough of these to go through like this whole sheet of steel that I had water jet?
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like I want to have enough demand where I can be creative and flexible and not feel like I'm going to lose my butt because I, you know, didn't design something that people liked or something. Like, because if you're on the floating edge of like, if you're only barely have enough customers who are interested in your stuff and you do something that's not as desirable as the last thing you did, then maybe you're in trouble. I don't know,
I'm
you know what I
gonna
mean?
I'm gonna I'm gonna gamble. I'm gonna wager that it's not actually something you need to worry about. Um, I think at this point there's enough traction. And that's just like maker imposter syndrome
Hmm.
stuff that we do to ourselves.
Yeah.
Every time I go to a show, I get nervous because I'm like, man, what if it does? What if people don't like what I brought? What if I don't sell? I haven't done a show that I haven't sold out at in probably 15 years. I
Hmm.
like so there's no basis in the fear, right?
Hmm.
Which I don't think is I think the fear is fine, like staying humble, like super valuable, as long as that's not like prohibiting you from
Yeah.
an improvement or
Being creative and
well, and
stuff.
that's
Yeah.
here's my point with like what's enough, right? So you have the swing. On one side, you spend 5 days a week, every hour producing. On the other side, you spend all that time promoting, doing video content.
Networking.
Man, networking, like I'd almost throw design in there, which feels weird, but
Hmm.
but it's not production work, right? So it's all
It's
kind
great.
of work that pays off in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So we know that either one of those things could ultimately probably be effective at creating an income,
Hmm.
but in different ways, right?
Right.
So is there a way that allows you to work, like I don't know, do you think of your work in cycles or seasons or anything? Like do you think like 2 weeks or a month or
Well, things are changing so fast right now that it just feels like, I don't know.
like a
It's like a
giant
phoenix
mess?
coming out of the ashes,
Yeah,
and I don't know what it's gonna even look like,
right. Yeah.
Um,
Well, okay, so there's like the idea, right? So we know that we're not going to create a product in and out in one day. You don't go to
mhm,
work, like it's not day labor. You're not going to go to work,
yeah,
get home, get paid, move on.
yeah,
2 weeks seems short. So say it's a month. If you
mhm,
started off the month and you made 50 overlands, you look at that and you go, okay, that's actually enough overlands for the month.
Mhm.
I pivot. That that is what I am kind of playing with. I have more product lines than you do, and I'm struggling with it because a lot of times I look and I'm like, it's so easy just to slip into like the next job, realizing that social media or like even like email stuff like that like are getting pushed to the side, or design work, right?
Mhm.
So what's like the honest balance? Do you see a way that you could honestly balance your to where you feel like you have the bandwidth for three or four different components of the business? So say production, design, process improvement, and then would you consider like order fulfillment and shipping and production, or is that separate?
Yeah, I'd put that in production. Yeah.
Okay, so you'd put that in production. I would keep it separate. And then sales and marketing. So we're looking at five
Mhm.
to six. We're looking at 5 to 6 kind of elements.
Mhm.
If you break down a month, you already have more elements than weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the breakdown?
Right. Yeah, no, it's I where I'm at right now is I like coming up with a pretty solid strategy because if I don't have a strategy and like a schedule in mind, I'll just go all in on one of those things. And
Mm-hmm.
recently it has been production. Like for the last 8 months, I like didn't post a lot. I didn't my YouTube channel dried up. Like I quit posting videos up until this podcast started. I was making knives. Like that was all I was doing.
Right.
And I realized like, yeah, that's probably not a good idea. I need to be a little more diversified. And so I'm building out my schedule. And right now, kind of how it looks is like we do the podcast. So one day a week, ideally, if we can do it, sit down and do the podcast. Nice thing is there's not a lot of post processing for something like this.
Right.
And then I try to pick one day out of the week where I know I'm going to be doing something interesting for a video for YouTube, because the way I'm doing it, vlog style, is also similar to the podcast in that it's pretty easy to do.
Okay. Not a
And
lot of
so
editing.
yeah, if I can do one video a week and one podcast a week and produce, but the one that I haven't strategized in is design right now, because I don't think it's a one day a week thing. I think it's more of a like 1 week a month thing, or one or two
So I
weeks
had
a
asked you
quarter
about this.
or
I had
something.
asked you about this a few days ago because it's something that I'm really struggling with.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think I could do a one day a week thing. I think it
One day a week's not enough.
no, and you get in the rhythm, and it may be like
Yeah.
1 o'clock in the afternoon by the time you like get the groove, and you're really like pushing design forward. And then if you
Yep.
disappear for 6 days, it's not
You
clean. It's not
can't
a
enter
smooth way
back
to do
in.
it.
So that's kind of where I've ended up, which is I'm kind of looking at it like, okay, am I able to schedule my production work in the beginning of the month
Mhm.
so that I go out, I do my production. Maybe that's like maybe I do 10 folders, which for me would be like insanity.
Mhm.
I would love that. But I'm doing side pops, I'm doing polys, we're doing like other products that we're managing and stuff like that. So my time at this point is like very fractured,
Mhm.
but it's all valuable and I don't know like where to pull back.
Yeah.
Design is one that it's hard to get into the flow state for me. Like you said, maybe by
Mhm.
lunchtime that first day, I'm starting to like hit my groove.
Mhm.
And then by 4 o'clock, there's something with the kids and it's dinner. Like, okay. I mean, really, for me in the past, it's been like a 2 week vortex where I'm working in design. I'm like kind of not talking to people. I'm probably missing some meals and like being like a general weirdo. I
Mhm.
don't have the
Yeah.
opportunity to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So it's
It's
like, and it here's a weird one. Do you classify your work where like you look at like do you consider the podcast work? Can you look at this and be like, yeah, we did a podcast today. I did work.
I consider it work
You
for
consider it
sure.
work.
For sure.
And design,
For
same.
sure. Consider it work. Yeah.
So I've always had a hard time. If I wasn't making
Yeah.
knives, I didn't feel like I was working. It's
Mhm.
so backwards.
Yeah.
It's like
Well,
so ridiculous.
all that I had, which was work for 8 years, was design and video
Yeah.
work. So
Yeah.
that's where we're coming from the opposite direction.
Right. It's like where
Yeah.
you start, you add in
You
something.
get
See,
habits.
you're
Yeah.
feeling it organically because now you're doing production. But production in a way is that concept of day labor.
Mhm.
You work, the work is done, you get paid, you work again.
Mhm.
The content creation, the design work, those are things that live on past the day's work.
Right.
So you're feeling like an opportunity cost, which is like, man, all right, I'm doing this and I'm making really good money, but you can also see that these other things that are very important are getting pushed to the side.
Yeah.
I think in time management, this just falls under like important versus emergency,
Yeah.
right? So the important
Yeah.
things you can like put off as you have little fires to put out, but
Yeah.
they're probably long term more valuable than putting like, I mean, a fire is like, I guess he depends on the fire, but you know, you understand what I'm saying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Like an analogy is almost like if you're like on a big ship and you're out in the middle of the ocean and you're like, "Oh, we're a long ways from land. Like I don't have to worry about steering it that much. I'm just going to be productive in another way." And then it's like, "Well, but deep down like you'd love for this ship to be headed to the Bahamas, not the Arctic." And so it's like you got to put down your broom and like go point the ship in the right direction every once in a
Right.
while. And that's how it feels is like sometimes I stand back and I'm like, I don't know if I'm headed the right direction like at scale in mass like over the next 15 years like I need to correct a little bit. And that's where designing knives for mass market and stuff like that is part of that picture because it's like
Mm-hmm.
part of the way the brand is viewed to the public is like collaborations with CRKT and what's going on, what's happening. You went to work with Worksharp, like big projects like that where it's like exposure type stuff. For
Sure.
me, is like steering the big ship. And then
Right.
it's like, but I'm down in the like basement, like making knives. You know what I mean? And it's like I don't know where the ship's going. It has that sensation a little bit.
I think the fact that you're aware of it now is telling. I think it's like some of the stuff around parenting, like I worry about, and I'm like, man, at least I'm like having the thought.
Yeah,
Like at least I'm
yeah,
worried about this thing,
yeah,
and that
exactly.
maybe means it won't be a problem.
Mhm,
Over the years, I've tried so many different variations of like time management and production. I'm kind of getting to a stage now where I realize that in my shop, I think I'm not interested in doing serial production.
mhm,
And it's weird. It's a weird feeling because well, what does that mean? Well, it means that I'm probably not going to be working on like big batches of the same thing as my day-to-day work.
mhm,
But I'm struggling with how to like restructure that.
right.
Um, and so I'm looking at it like kind of like a weekly thing. Like if the first few days of the week are production and the last few days are man, no, it's honest. Like as I'm saying it, none of it sounds good. It's like
Mhm,
I do productive production work for 2 to 3 days out of the week, and then on the tail end of the week, I do design work and like process improvement. And but then like, are you doing accounting in there? Are you doing like
yeah,
material orders? All of the you make more knives, you interact with more people, you order more materials, you ship more product. Like there's a point where like there's a break point where it basically wouldn't work unless you scale.
mhm,
I don't ever like running like Ricky Bobby style, in the red.
yeah,
I want to honestly, man, if I could run it like 50% of like my internal capacity as a human and be
yeah,
successful, I think that would be
yeah.
amazing. Maybe that number's closer to 30.
Manage your duty cycle.
Yeah. Like
Yeah,
manage my duty cycle.
yeah,
Exactly.
mm,
Like it works for machines, man. Some of this stuff is like, I think we way overcomplicate it.
yeah,
So, man, but it's hard.
yeah. Well, my thoughts are so I have like a certain number of knives, something similar to the Overland, like a fixed blade, but I have a certain number of those that I want to have produced in a month.
Okay.
And my idea is if I can stay on the overland and that particular knife and perfect it and perfect it and perfect it from a production workflow standpoint, the
Yep.
amount of time it takes me to make that many knives is going to shrink. And
Totally. We're
that,
talking like Toyota style,
right, exactly.
right?
And it earns me more time back
Yeah.
to get the design work fit in there and whatnot. So, like for the last year, it's been hard to get design time in, but I've also gotten more and more and more efficient on the knives. And so it's like it's happening fast enough where the scales are tipping, but the
Right.
temptation is to use that efficiency to make more. You know what I
That's
mean?
it, right?
Yeah.
Work makes work.
Yeah.
So this is we talked I think in one of the earlier podcasts like about like flexibility, and it's like it's
Hmm.
flexibility is only as good as your application of it.
Yeah.
So is efficiency.
Hmm.
If efficiency if your use of efficiency is just to make a little bit more every
Hmm.
time, I mean, if you're trying to grow into a production company, that's probably not wrong,
Hmm.
right? I think a lot of businesses, I think a lot of production, like shop guys, regardless of the industry, I think they jump these like weird divides where it's like they're outpacing their own production. So they like jump into being a production company.
Hmm.
And I think like, oh, now I went from like having a paid off CNC machine to like now I have 5 CNCs
Yeah.
and 3
Payroll.
employees. And it's like, yeah, but you had never figured out your actual workflow,
Hmm.
like for a one-man shop. So I think this almost comes down back to that brand building thing where it's like, if it's super organic, if you're like, man, I would just really like to be able to do an extra 25 knives a month. Okay. Those 25 knives a month could pay for help.
Hmm.
However many hours a week that is. Maybe that's a 20-hour a week employee. But that 20-hour a week employee is able to do that work efficiently and he has bandwidth on the end,
Hmm.
right? That still only works if you don't use the efficiency to just make more,
Yeah.
but to like work differently.
Yeah.
Where you're
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm working 5 days a week. I don't want to work 5 days a week. We just got efficient enough that now we can run 4 days.
Yeah, and the other thing that I struggle with for sure is like the guilt because if
Totally.
once you hit a gold vein of like this knife is selling, people want it,
Yeah.
I know how to make it, I can efficiently make it, and then you disappear for a week like I went backpacking. It's like it's hard to not think in your head of like how much you lost by not making knives that week.
Dude,
And
how much did you gain by going
no,
backpacking for a
well,
week?
I will say that was worth it. That was very worth it, no matter what it costs. But it's like even but smaller stuff. Let's say there's a sale on blueberry bushes, and we're just gonna go buy out their last stock, and so it's gonna cost me like half of a day to go to Home Depot and like plant them and stuff. It's like stuff
Sure.
like that that it's like, oh, I'm gonna go save $20 on these bushes, but how much does it cost? And it's like hard to not let your brain go to like math when it comes to
Right.
simpler stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's like, well, the best economic thing would be for this to be the only thing I do is just make these knives. But it's like that's not a very like
Right.
human way to approach it. You know what I mean?
No, and that's
So
not like you going to get blueberry bushes with your wife and your babies. Like, dude, you can
yeah,
always make more money.
yeah, right.
Like, right? And
Yeah,
why are you making money if it doesn't free you up to go do that? That's
yeah,
the beauty of what we do,
hmm,
right?
right.
I have guilt on another side, right? Which I think of this as like Western work ethic guilt. I
Mm,
grew up in a culture of makers that are some of the hardest working people I know.
hmm,
I mean, like we're talking like, you know, 12, 14-hour days, 6, 7 days a week kind of stuff, like watching makers do this. And as I was like coming up, there was a big part of me that was like, this is the way it's done.
hmm,
But in the back of my mind, I was seeing things that would allow me to run my business differently. And I took those chances, but it still messes with me.
yeah,
Like I feel like I should be like 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 almost like I feel like the work should be harder. Or I feel
yeah,
like It's like
No pain, no
digging
gain.
ditches or something. No
Yeah.
pain, no gain. And
Yeah.
I, man, having kids, I've gotten better about it because like there's a lot of value in hard work, right?
Mhm.
But I also see, man, there's a lot of value in working intelligently
Yeah.
and like creating time. Time
Well,
for me is the asset that I'm trying to
it's
build.
like the Bill Gates quote. I think it was him. He's like, if I have a really difficult problem, I'll find the laziest person and get them to handle
Sure.
it because they'll find the easiest way to do it.
Right.
You
I wonder
know?
if there's any like truth in that. I've known a
Yeah.
lot of lazy people and I don't
Yeah.
always feel like that's like,
Yeah. There's a limit,
you
obviously.
might be dipping like hot dogs in mayonnaise because it's like easier than cooking.
Right,
Doesn't
right.
mean it's the best solution.
Right, no doubt. I guess the lazy you'd be that could be loosely defined in that way, I guess. It
Loosely.
depends. It
Yeah. And,
depends.
and also what is lazy in Bill Gates' organization?
Yeah,
So
right.
like you have someone and yeah, maybe it's not lazy. Maybe it's just like, yeah, someone who is underutilized.
Well, and
Oh,
and
like,
I've like in sometimes I've thought to myself like maybe I'm lazy because I'll whenever something I think we've mentioned this in the podcast before, but when I'm doing something, if it feels inefficient, everything in my body tells me to stop doing it. Like this just it
I
sucks.
wish I had that.
And I'll like I remember growing up with this was like a formative experience. I was on a trail crew for 2 summers when I was young, like high school. And there was we would basically dig trail on a contract for the Forest Service. So it'd be existing trail that was like overgrown or like trees had fallen, rocks had rolled on it, just in the forest,
Hmm.
the what public forest. And so we'd go dig, 10 miles of trail, and I was just always thinking like this is not like I couldn't stop thinking like this is not the best way to do this, and I couldn't shut it off. And I remember there was one time like one of the bosses like snapped at me. He's like, lots of bright ideas or something like that, like just kind of talking down to me because I kept like having ideas of like to make it more efficient. And so I was like, fine, I'm not gonna like say my ideas ever again, and I like shut up about it. But I remember like thinking to myself like I'm gonna I'm gonna use this in the future. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't see it, but like I can't not think about efficiency. And if I'm doing something that doesn't feel efficient, then I immediately feel like I'm becoming lazy because my body is just like stop doing this inefficient thing. But if I'm
That's
doing something that
amazing.
feels efficient, then I can do it all day. And you know what
Right.
I mean? And that like that feeling of laziness where you're like just stop. Like it doesn't kick in if it feels efficient. It's
You're
weird.
right. I've got, I don't know, man. I've said before that I like to work efficiently, but I think in a way it's because I separate some of my work from my income.
Hmm.
So like sometimes I just want to make a knife
Yeah.
and I want to just enjoy it and like dawdle along through the process.
Mhm.
And in that, it's all personal skills. So it's all hand controlled. It's like I'm just working. And in
Yeah.
that, I'm not necessarily like, of course, I'm trying to be efficient for myself, but I think there are ways of working that are enjoyable and like satisfying that will never be like efficient,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
There's always a more efficient way of doing something. And the ultimate efficiency is usually having someone else do it. So,
Yeah.
like at the point where you want to be so efficient that you don't want to do the thing, it's like now you're a manager.
Yeah.
Or like now
Right.
is when you are wearing a suit and sitting in the
You just
office
delegate
and the
everything.
production
Yeah.
floor is doing something else.
Yeah.
For me, it's always been a slippery slope. Uh, I guess actually the first time I ever experienced that was delivering pizzas. It's like my favorite job, like of jobs I'd ever had. I did it for 4 years, like 18 to 22. I had a Honda CRX with an Integra motor. It was lowered, had like sweet sound system.
Nice.
It was rad. I would go deliver pizzas every night. At the end of the night, I'd probably have like $150 cash in my pocket.
Dang.
Over that time period, you see drivers get lured out of driving into management.
Mhm.
Never once did I see it end with them being happier.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that's crazy. Like you're technically making more money,
Yeah.
but now you're just in the hut, like
Yeah.
answering phones and like dealing with the drivers, and like dealing with like people
Logistics
running
and
the phones
yeah.
and the problems as opposed to cruising around in your
Listen to
car,
music.
making cash money, listening to music.
Yeah.
Scale that up to shop life, and there's a component of that I
Yeah.
think is like very, very valid.
Yeah. No, I think something I should be disciplined on is teaching myself to not make every single thing in my life an optimization problem, because that's just the way I'm
Ooh.
wired, and it's not always the healthy thing to do. It pays dividends in certain ways, but then other times it's like just stop. Like it's not, it doesn't have to be optimized, you know.
Yeah, I mean, same here. And I've always kind of wondered like what overall what that means. Like you overthink things or you think too
Mhm.
much at different points in my life. Like it's been incredibly beneficial, right? I think there's
Mhm.
like everything we're talking about, there's probably a balance point.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what are you overthinking?
Yeah. No, it's something I wish I could turn on and off, you know what I mean? But it's like
Right.
that's not really how it works, but maybe with enough introspection and enough wise decades, I could get a
Podcasting.
little bit of a handle. Yeah, right. Right. But no, I tend to overthink, but then other times I think just enough, and it serves me really well. Like, I'll map a process out like I'll be like 20 steps ahead thinking about how I'm going to get through this struggle. And I was like
Hmm.
planning for that struggle all along, you know what I mean? And it ends up paying off, you know?
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's like foresight kind of stuff. Could also
mhm.
just be like some general anxiety
Yeah,
where
I
your
was going to
brain is
say
like running down the road like,
it
"Oh,
can
okay,
create,
what
yeah,
threats are coming? I'm going to try to handle as many of them or as many unseen
yeah,
circumstances as possible."
yep, yep.
You know?
Yeah. No, it's an anxiety inducer. I don't have like issues with anxiety, but there's times where I'll get, once I have like that third or fourth struggle on my plate of like, let's say there's something in the shop and then something with the house and then something with the kids, like as soon as I get like three or four items and I start to try to focus on all of them and solve all those problems in my head and optimize all those things, like there is a bandwidth that gets reached, and then it's like fatigue sets in and then anxiety, you know what I mean? So
It's the
I
time
try
pie.
to like what's that?
Time pie. You're
Yep.
back in it, back to the
Yep.
time pie,
Yep.
man.
Yep.
Like, well, I mean,
And
probably some of it is just like decision fatigue.
yeah, that's
Like you come
exactly what
into
it
the
is.
morning, you have
Mhm.
that's that's why you hear like the um like only wearing like a black turtleneck sweater every day.
Yeah.
You know, that's why people do that stuff. So it's like one less to sit at the point where you're having to make huge amounts of high level decisions. Can you imagine just reducing? Like I wake up every morning, I put on my clothes that I don't have to think about. I eat food. None of that requires any bandwidth.
Mhm.
Probably makes a lot of sense. Maybe
Yeah.
not for you or me, but
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I've found that is a big help is like try not to leave anything open ended, because the open ended things that you leave are the ones that start to stack. For example, like
man,
if I'm gonna work on my deck and like right now one of the posts kind of sank and I'm thinking about starting on fixing it, but I'm telling myself like I'm not gonna start on it until I'm gonna finish it in one shot. Because if I get all these problems in my head and I start working on it and get like slightly invested and then pivot and pivot and pivot and I get
yeah,
like four or five things that are halfway finished, that's where like decision fatigue becomes a huge problem. But if I it's kind of like lean manufacturing from a headspace standpoint of like I'm gonna only bring the things in that I'm gonna use today, and then I'm gonna complete it and I'm gonna send it out the door. So it's
right.
like, I'm only gonna bring a problem into my head when I'm gonna solve it right now. I'm gonna completely solve it, no matter how long it takes, and then discard it and then bring in a new one,
So good in
you know?
theory. Like it's so good. Well, you had said like sometimes you think about things just enough. I mean, if you could, if we were capable of actually doing that in multiple areas of our life, we would actually probably do quite a bit more
Yeah.
because
Right.
we're wasting resources and like going back to like the social media or content creation thing. If it's scheduled in and not like an arbitrary like, oh, I need to do a video, I think you have a much better odds of just being like, cool, like it takes me 4 hours a week to do my content creation.
Mhm.
Like you're just like budgeting money, like you're budgeting
Yeah.
time for
Yeah.
work in ways, not that all work is of equal value, but that all work is valuable.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Mhm. For sure.
man,
Totally.
I don't know how to do it. I don't know. I literally at this point, like I'm just like on a personal note, um, next week I'm getting tested for ADHD.
Hmm.
So like people have always said like that they thought I had ADHD or whatever, but I'm like pretty productive overall.
Mhm.
I'm just very curious because at this point in my life with all of these bouncing balls, like I am struggling with it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, all
No,
right, cool. If I can put a name to it in a process to like improve it,
yeah. No, I've
you
I've
know?
I've thought before that I probably have some degree of something like that. I don't know. I haven't like investigated it, but my brain doesn't work the same as most people. Like I've realized that. Like I'm kind of an odd duck.
Yeah.
So
It's because you're too
um
smart. That's
I don't
why.
know. Get stuck in my head all the time, I guess.
Dude,
But
it's a lot and it changes. Man, all of this stuff changes. Sometimes I think like, I've created this system for myself where I like maybe this is why I wasn't good at jobs.
mhm.
Like I was never an excellent employee.
Yeah.
Um I think I'm pretty good at running my business and I
Yeah.
overall I enjoy it. But like I noticed that over the last, 3 to 4 years, as things have gotten more busier just around life, the areas where I did struggle have come into focus in a different way. And I
Mhm.
think that's a lot of what these conversations are, which is if you are seeing an inefficiency in your business or an area where you feel like you could be doing things a little bit different, I think you are way better off addressing them early, even if it comes at a financial cost, than like letting them just kind of grow
Mhm.
quietly,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think the to go back to the analogy of like steering a boat, it's like
Mm-hmm.
you can't change your mind too many times. It's like you don't want to just be swerving all over the place. It's like the shortest distance between two points is like as straight a line as possible.
Right.
So it's like you don't want to over course correct all the time, as in like, I overdid this and I'm going that way, and you bounce around and like pretty soon you're just going in circles.
Right.
And so that's where I think focusing on the big picture and where you're headed is important, but don't chase every little idea to like the nth degree.
Oh,
And it's
man.
like, because if every 12 months you're on a new plan, then
I'm
it's,
like, I've
yeah,
been, it's funny, like, don't judge me.
right.
Don't.
Well,
Last
I'm a
year I
victim
went
of
on a,
doing that.
dude, I mean, you're at this point, you're pretty focused. I think that the way that you're working leads towards that. I really like learning, as I know that you do too.
Mhm.
Um, and I think like post shop move and all this stuff, I needed to like decompress in a way, but it's like, I went to Arizona and did a 3-day course in patina work, came back and
Mhm.
like spent probably a couple $1,000s on equipment. And like, it's like a deep dive and it's like, okay, it doesn't have a whole lot of work with my, like to do with my day-to-day work. The most recent is like forging equipment. I spent like,
Mhm.
I don't know, $30,000 on forging equipment
Mhm.
and really have no intention of like earning an income with forging.
Mhm.
That to me is like, man, that's a hobby inside of a hobby, right? So
Mhm.
knife making maybe
Yeah.
starts as a hobby and then it becomes like a career.
Yeah.
For me, the ability to essentially treat myself to inefficiency and like a different way of thinking is valuable,
Mhm.
but it does come at a cost. And the cost that's time pie, man. It's
Yeah.
there's more of a distraction. It's like
Yeah.
if I wanted to be super efficient right now, what I should probably be doing is digging full bore into my CAD and CAM skills and process improvement to make things on my own CNC, submitting design work and putting Burnley brand production projects into play.
Right.
right? So the question for me is like, well, okay, where's the right balance of that? Because it, again, you look at it and you're like, well, there's like five, like I at the end of the day, I think I run almost three complete businesses, which is
Hmm.
me making product out of my shop, me designing product for production companies, and me being creative director of Burnley brand.
Hmm.
Each
Yeah.
one of those things basically could support my family at this point. Each one of those things could probably support me working a 40-hour week on it.
Yeah. So
How
it's
do I
like,
how do I pick and choose?
yeah. Yeah.
Because it's
No.
not the money. Like
Yeah.
the money is important, but if it came down to it, like I'd probably just go full bore into design and Burnley brand. And it's like I've spent the last 20 years building my skills in my workshop. I don't want to do that,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
you
keep
know?
thinking like that 3 to 5 year. You hear a lot of people say like think 3 to 5 years ahead,
Mm-hmm.
and I like that philosophy. I think that's a good time frame to be thinking about. And for me, I keep
Where do you want
thinking
to be?
like in 3 to 5 years, that's what I'm deciding right now. Ultimately, like that's kind of the open ended question because, like I said, the way things have been going in the shop has kind of surprised me. Like I didn't really think it was going to happen this fast, and I thought it was just going to be like this skunk works of like a support role to my design, and then all of a sudden, I'm getting more efficient than I thought I would.
Mm-hmm.
People want the knife more than I thought they would. It's like it's growing into a production company like underneath me, and it's like, is that, do I want to take that all the way to being a production company or do I want to stop somewhere short of that? And it's like, it's on track. Like if I just kept doing what I'm doing, like it just keep growing. And it's like, but
It'll happen without you making a decision.
exactly. And that's where I'm trying to be. I've had many conversations with my dad about this of like, what do I want? Because the question is largely is like, I'm going to have another shop soon. Like that's coming. And in addition, like a new house for the family, like our family's growing and whatnot. And so I keep thinking like, do I want to plan this to be set up where someone who's an employee could spend time there? Or do I want to avoid that altogether? And so that's the 3 to 5 year decision that I'm on right now is like, does an employee fit, and does an employee allow me more time to design, or is that a pipe dream? Is it really going to be that managerial position? Is it going to take a lot of time, you know?
I would say based on my own experience, I actually think your process allows you to it's more teachable than my process and would require I think it would free you up.
Hmm.
Um Mine allowed me to we went up to two full-time employees. I was able to make more product, make more money overall, but I spent a lot more time doing like managerial stuff and I really didn't
Hmm.
enjoy it. We
Yeah.
were one or two steps away from being efficient enough. Like we were lucky, man. One of the cool things about being like a small shop, like hiring a person, especially if you have like a home shop, is you're basically running them through a filter that if they can't be around your family, they can't be an
Hmm.
employee.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's actually pretty cool because you're
Hmm.
getting a caliber of person
Yeah.
that you are essentially being like, yeah, I'm cool with you like interacting with my kids.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've worked in shops over the years where like, yeah, man, that guy over there in the corner, like, you know, he's an ass. I don't want him anywhere around anybody I like,
Yeah.
but he's
Right.
good at his job, you know?
Yeah. Exactly.
So, I mean, I do think like, I think where you're at now, even as a test, part time employment would probably be pretty valuable.
Yeah.
It took me going to the two full timers to see that it was not where I wanted to be right now.
Hmm.
Maybe later, maybe I'll get to a
Yeah.
point where that's like something I want to approach again.
Yeah.
But I was not efficient enough in the areas that you actually have the efficiency to capitalize on someone being in your shop.
Well, I was telling my wife just the other day, I think I could, if I got the right guy, I could. There's nothing I'm doing that I couldn't train someone to do
Right.
outside of design. Like as far as
Right.
like making knives, like I
Yep.
think I could apprentice somebody up to like being able to manage almost everything. Mainly because I'm doing like CNC grinding, and so
Yep.
it's like that. I could like help could go as far as I wanted it to go if I brought him
Yep.
in the shop, and so that's I know if I opened that valve, like, that would be a huge boon as far as efficiency and, like, productivity. But the
Yep.
question is, I know it would work. That's not the question. It's,
Right.
is it what I would want if I extrapolate that to 5 to 10 years? Is that picture the picture that I dream of? And that's
Man.
the what is the dream precisely? Because I feel like I'm moving forward. It's like I said, it's like the I'm shoveling coal in the furnace in the bottom of the ship, and the ship's hauling
Right.
ass.
Right.
And I go up to check. I'm like, we're headed towards the Bahamas, and I'm like, but do I actually want to go to, like, I don't know, South America instead? Like,
Right.
should I turn the ship a
Right.
little bit or let it go
Yeah. The
straight?
answer
Or
is not to keep shoveling coal.
yeah, right,
It's like you got to take time. And that's
yeah,
where I think a lot of people get into their business and then spend the majority of their career shoveling coal.
yeah, yeah,
It's not that it doesn't work. And for some people, that's exactly where they want to be.
yeah.
Have you watched the Lego movies?
No, I
Oh
haven't.
man, one
I'm
you
missing
need
out.
to. They're amazing. They are amazing.
Hmm,
Yeah. But they talk about like, the special.
yeah,
I look at my business and I'm like, it's interesting to me when it's special.
yeah,
I didn't start making knives because I wanted to work in a factory.
right.
Does that mean I want to run a factory? Because you're still working in one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I think, and again, everything in its season. Like maybe I get to a point where I'm like, you know what, I'm good. Like
yeah,
I've spent enough time working with my hands. I actually do want to explore this at a different level,
hmm.
but
Well,
not there now.
that
I
may
would
be a
like to be able to
difference
do like
between
an
us.
Instagram post.
There was probably a year where I did some design work for a sheet metal fabricator in Boise, who they had like a
Hmm.
laser and a press brake, all CNC. So it wasn't like milling or anything like that, but it was like powder coating, press brake, welding, and laser cutting, and it's all highly engineered products. So we're talking about like
Hmm.
brackets that are like built by 100 of them in a row. They're identical for like a piece of weightlifting equipment or a piece of like some component for a forklift or something. And I was basically like doing part-time work that where it was like filling in gaps for like engineering solutions in during like it could be something on the laser that would be benefited if it had this system. Or and I was working on that stuff, and like walking into the shop in there was like really enjoyable. Like it brought like a lot of life to me, to
Right.
like there's this huge mechanism, and I'm trying to like refine it, and like I'm trying to grease this gear and add efficiency here and improve this process, and like doing the thinking part. And that's where it's like if I did have like a couple employees and they were making parts, and I was like having more of a bird's eye view of like improvement, like that is where I really do well. And so it's like that's where I start to think maybe that is the route. But if I get too far down that path and I don't like it, it's a hard one to come back from. It's
I
not
actually, I,
impossible,
I
but
wouldn't, I don't, yeah, I don't know if I would even worry about that. If you do it organically, if you're like, hey, I'm going to become a company, I'm going to go get 5 machine loans and lease a building and hire a bunch of people. Yeah, that's hard to back
yeah,
out of.
yeah,
If you are like, man, I could really use 20 hours a week of help.
yeah,
That's no,
yeah,
that's nothing. You can back down from that. If it gets you to the stage where you can buy your next shop and you're like, I'm going to add another person, that's no harm, no foul.
hmm, yeah,
That's the beauty, I think, of a lot of what we're doing is growth. The growth potential is there, and you're able to test it and kind of see. And that might be like a generational shift in the way that businesses are run. Like I'm I'm not a businessman,
hmm,
right? And like I look at this and I'm like, okay, you can become a business, you can become a company, a brand without having to become like large. There's a way
hmm,
to do it as
yeah.
small as possible and
There's
still be like
that mid
like
game,
fast and effective. Yeah,
yeah,
it's like the mid game, right? Like
hmm,
you want like I want to be super agile. I want to have high profit margin. I want to be able to essentially I guess ties back to the agile thing like shift with industry
hmm,
or as and take on small projects but still be able to handle bigger projects. And all of that stuff you can do without like a lot of overhead.
yeah,
Again, coming back to like all these little micro brands that are popping up, using overseas production. That's like prime example.
Mm-hmm.
They're putting out numbers like they're a big production company, but they're not tied to those machines or
Yeah.
employees.
Yeah.
Could do that from a
Yeah.
beach.
Well, I kind of look at like Spartan blades. They have a kind of a cool model, like because they're not. It doesn't seem like they're trying to like we're going to attack Benchmade and get into Cabela's,
Right.
and you know what I
Right.
mean. They're just like playing this little alley of the industry,
Right.
not little. This mid game that we talked about that I think is
Right.
kind of cool and interesting.
Right. Yeah. Real numbers. They
Mm-hmm.
enjoy their work. They make a great product.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so
Yeah.
that,
So
I
I asked
mean, that's like
myself,
where some of this, yeah. Like,
do
what's the
do
goal?
I want that, or do I want the one man shop with royalty revenue and things, just like a mixture of incomes and like total flexibility? I don't know. I don't know.
I, I kind of, man, I think I think the way that you're working now, I think there's a lot in the way that you start to work, which informs like your future. It feels
Hmm.
very familiar. I think you can I think you could definitely play in the production side and still be able to satisfy like the small side.
Hmm.
I look at the same thing. Like when I look at 5 years, my next one might be like to be able to afford like a 2 or 3 bay commercial space.
Hmm.
I would probably rent out a couple bays. I would move some machinery in. And at that point, even just one product line out of a shop there, and
Hmm.
then, have my shop at home to work on my truck and probably still have some equipment on. But
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's the thing about our type of business is it doesn't have to be all or
Yeah.
nothing.
And
And one thing can fund the next thing.
there is no textbook on it. There is no mold. There is no
No.
model. It's like it's a malleable instrument.
Super. And it's
So,
interest based. That's like talking about the forging equipment. My business and the success of my business allowed me to purchase equipment that is interesting to me
mhm,
without the necessity for that to hit the floor
right.
and be instantly productive.
Hmm.
Scale that up to where you can buy a building, man. I mean, a lot of this is the long game, right? We're makers, we work with our hands. There will be a day where our hands aren't doing the work or we're not interested in the work or capable of doing the work. Man, I'd love to get to that point and have like 3 or 4 commercial buildings.
Yeah.
I mean, why are you making money? Got to
Mm,
make it work.
yeah.
I love that. I love that idea that like, um, asking if your money works as hard for you as you do for it.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
you're making it work pretty hard right now. Just bought a
Yeah.
new machine.
Right. Yeah. Doing my best. It's a wild ride. It's happening fast and it's a lot of fun. But like I said, I found myself kind of staring off in the distance of like, all right, it's moving really fast. Make sure it's pointed in the right direction. That's like the main thing.
Totally.
Um,
Just keep adjusting. Dude,
yeah.
we got way off in the weeds.
Yeah.
That was we
Right.
went
Yeah.
that was a big tangent. So here's a question, right? Like go back to social media content creation. What I would love with some of these episodes to leave it with a plan.
Hmm.
What do you think you can do that would improve, like how can you do a little more content creation over the next month and still maintain your workflow, because you can't
A,
really change your workflow
a
over the next month.
podcast a week, a video a week, and I wouldn't put like an Instagram number to it, but just like general activity. Like posting things that are interesting on Instagram when they come up, hopefully a handful of times a week. But if I can get one video up on YouTube and ideally if we can pull it off a podcast a week, it'd be nice. That's kind of
We've
the
been pretty
loose frame.
consistent,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. We added a podcast in. So it's like, does a podcast create some shift in like Instagram? Like, is one podcast worth 3 Instagram posts? Like, I don't
Right.
know.
Yeah.
Like my overactive brain.
Right. Yeah. Optimization problem once again.
All right. So you're going to do a pod a week, a
Hmm.
video a week, and try to hit Instagram.
Hmm.
I will try to do, I'm going to try to do an Instagram post a day. I'm going to try to
All
do
right.
one Instagram post per day.
All right. Well, now we got a handful of people that are going to call us out on our BS if we
Yeah.
don't do it. So accountability,
I don't know what it's gonna be,
right?
man.
Well, well, I will say like we went off topic, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. I mean, I had a that was a good conversation myself. I thought
It
it was
was.
really
I mean,
really
these
interesting.
some of this stuff is almost circular.
Mm,
We're gonna swing back around it
yeah,
because as you and I kind of, I don't know, I'm finally like level in the new shop and like business is changing for me. You're in like a huge growth phase,
yeah,
but the problems like and the I don't even I hesitate to say like problems,
yeah,
but like the issues that we experience are like changes th- over the last 20 years. Like I've seen them come up for me in multiple kind of different different areas, same problem,
yeah. Exactly.
right?
It's like same shit, different
So
day, but it's
yeah,
it's like it surfaces at a different scale.
right.
You know.
A lot of these
Yeah,
are issues of scale.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I don't know. I
yeah,
think like what with social media content creation, like I think figuring out the root, like what the value is. So is it reach? Is it building community? Is it brand awareness?
yeah.
Um,
Or are you going to be in a dark black box with a mail slot and you finish the knife and you push it out into the world and you go on to make another one? You know what I
Sometimes that
mean?
sounds
Yeah,
delightful.
I know, right? Like somebody's
Like,
on the other side of that slot. They're going to want it.
just
And then hopefully they're not just in a little pile on the other side. Like-
oh man.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot, man.
Yeah.
Figuring it out. What's the balance? You guys got any ideas? Are you in a
Yeah.
business that you're having to balance something
Yeah.
similar?
Yeah.
If you're a maker and you got an idea on this, man, like post it up in the
Yeah.
comments. I would be very curious because there's makers that are doing a really good job, and like honestly, don't know how. Like if you're doing it and you're doing production and you're staying up on your socials, like props. That's
Shop elves.
impressive. Yep, it's all good.
Well, yeah.
Um,
Well, appreciate you
what
guys.
else, man? Any closers?
Uh, no, shoot. I think we about rounded it out there.
All
So
right, nice. Done
guess,
talking.
guess I, well, thank you guys, for the listen. And, I don't know. I feel like the thread was totally pulled. What do you think?
I like it. We're good, man.
Yeah.
Leave us a review.
Yeah.
Leave us some comments,
Comments are
questions.
great. Messages are great. We definitely are
Messages are great.
listening to feedback on what to talk about. So hit us
Yep.
up.
All right.
Yeah.
Take it easy, guys.
Thanks. Peace, guys.